That's on a Saturday at 11 a.m. And then in September, we're having Lina Salina, which is the professional name of Rhonda Chadwick, who's an archivist who really tries to bring archives to the general public, and she's doing a workshop on personal digital archiving, which really can help anybody try to figure out what to do with all their digital stuff and all the different places that it's stored. And we're experimenting a little bit with time these days, so that is going to be on a weekday in the afternoon, as opposed to these evening events. And if you have thoughts on when our events should be scheduled, email me. My email address is on the website, it's over there on the brochure. I'm really interested in making sure that we can have events when people are able to come. And then in next November, Jack Keane is going to be with us to talk about the Daughters of the King, the young women who were sent to the French provinces in North America, to New France, to help populate in the 17th century, to try to populate their colonies. And that'll be a presentation and then some hands-on. And yeah, so we've got almost the whole year planned and a few more to add. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Bob Como. If he starts bringing the microphone down here, just tell him you can't hear, and he'll do this. Okay?
Thank you. All right, so Daughters of the King in French are Fille du Roi, and they are very famous in Quebec because they were sent over from France by the king to marry all these men who didn't have wives. All right, so in Holyoke, we have the beautiful Smith Homesteads. And for the 4th year now, I've given a presentation here. The first year, 3 years ago, I did Linden Street, that beautiful house on Linden Street. And then one on Chestnut Street, the James Newton House, which is only 2 blocks away from us right now. And still there, it's a daycare center. And then I did a beautiful Tudor revival home on Pleasant Street, which was both a school and a community house and then a home. But now I'm going up to the Smiths Ferry neighborhood to talk about a certain set of houses. Now, I changed the title very slightly from a house into a homestead. So I'm going to talk about the land a lot more than the house, and that's great. I actually had that title going before I really figured out that the old house is not there anymore. It was taken down. This is a 1912 replacement, and I searched so hard for that house and had helpers trying to figure out where the house went. It's gone. But it doesn't matter, because we're going to talk about the people who live there, the land, and what the land was used for, and what they still do there. This land that this house is on now is the land of Jericho. This is called the Alleluia House now, but it's 1912 replacement. And we want to talk about the owners of that land from 1785 up to today. So, we're going to explain not only this house, but the people that live in the various houses that were on this land, because it was an enormous homestead. And if you could find the house nowadays, a very old one, and I can't even give you a picture of it because no one had a picture of it, but if you look at my map right here, Northampton Street seems like such a straight street, and you think that historically it must have been that way the whole time, but that's not true. In many places, Northampton Street has major detours from the historic trend of Northampton Street. It happens both north and south on that big street of Northampton Street, and a few minor details have also been put in place. Sorry. So if you look right here, this is where the Jericho House now. And this is where the old time Northampton Street actually went inland just a tiny bit, maybe about 120 feet inwards. And it kept that for 200 yards. And so this one thing confused me a lot. This was where the very old house of the Lewis Smith family was, made in 1785. It was back here, Jericho's here. If you go to Hamill's Summit View and go in the back and then go to the right, it was back there. And so this plot of land was where that very old house was. Now to tell you that seems easy, but it took me so many hours. In fact, I spent more time on telling you that one fact than on telling you all other pieces of information combined. Because I had to have people go through the old deeds, figure it out. It was, this part of Holyoke used to be part of Northampton, so it was in 2-county deed sets. And so we had to figure it out from that. It was very difficult. Okay, and this would have been parts of their land. This is behind that Hamill's catering service. But this is only a tiny portion of all the land that Lewis Smith owned. And we're going to talk as much about it as possible. Okay, so everyone should have a sheet, and it says on there, sponsors, it also tells you charities in the front. And it's important to have a sheet because on the back is the whole 11 children that Lewis Smith had with his wife, Eunice Judd. Now today is funded by the Holyoke Local Cultural Council, which is part of the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and they've funded me now for 10 years in a row. And there's also some other private sponsors, and promoted always for 11 years, and next year 12 years in a row by Holyoke Preservation Trust. And they do a lot. One of the first projects was clean the gravestones at Smithsbury Cemetery, and I started to help them that year. So the cemetery looks beautiful now because we spent a long time there. But next year is a very special year for the United States. And for that reason, the Historic Holyoke Preservation Trust has many events going, and they're listed right here. There's no set dates yet for anything, but they're going to have a sponsored musical group as part of the parade, and we have a book club hopefully here, and a movie night hopefully at Kennedy Park, in our contest. All right, and thanks to Holyoke Public Library, and this is a very important mural in the library. These are who they say they are, Captain Roland Thomas and Eliza Holyoke. And the legend might be true, that they were surveyors for sure. And when they were going by Mount Holyoke and Mount Tom on either side of the Connecticut River, supposedly they screamed across the river that I'm going to write down that mountain is going to be named after you. And the other guy on the other side, I'm going to name the other one after you. And that's quite possible. But if that's true, then I looked at this picture a lot, and I figured out which man was on which side of which party. If they're doing that, they're walking in the wrong direction in both murals. They're supposed to be walking the other way. But no, artistic license let you do this. And thanks very much to a lot of people, especially the last one. So he's not here today, but he went through all the deeds for me because I was getting very frustrated. And he knew them better than I did, so he helped me quite a bit to figure out what was going on. All right, and my business card is available. You might have it, or it'll be on the table later. And next year I put into do grants, or for grants, do tours and presentations in many places, and hopefully it'll expand into new communities. All right, and this is the last of having a charity for Promise Ministries. And they do many things, including Kate's Kitchen, and they do 3 homes for men who are addicts. They have a clothes store and a food pantry. But next year, look what I have for a charity. It's gonna be the Jericho program itself, right? So in the first of the year, I'm gonna change the charity icon to Jericho House. Right? This is the first time in 12 years that I've gone out of downtown Holyoke to find my charity, but they're very worthwhile. Okay, so here's some of the history of Holyoke, and you can read that. But most important to us, we want to look at the Smith family homesteads and what they owned. And when Lewis Smith came to the area to set up his house, and his house is actually right here, his son took it over. And this is a little piece of road they told you actually a long time ago was inwards. Now it is very straight. Here it's straight. Over here it is straight. Now, it's all straightened out, it's very confusing. But Lewis Smith had a home here, and then 4 of his sons had homes right in a row beyond his house. He paid for a school, and the family owned the ferry for a while. They owned a tavern that was on the other side of the road. And all these ventures were on all the land that Lewis Smith owned. And he owned the land in a straight line up to the top of the mountain. And then over beyond the cemetery up to the top of the mountain. So I think he owned about 1 square mile back in 1785. And it wasn't until he died in his will that he gave the land away to his sons. And they already had 2 homes on it, and 2 other sons would build homes on the land he gave them. But when they were out there, there was no Smith's Ferry. Smith's Ferry was part of Northampton until 1909. And in 1909, finally, the northern part of Holyoke came on. This is Ireland Parish. Look at the top. It says Northampton. That's where Smith Ferry is. And they gained that land by annexation in 1909. And finally, Holyoke came onto its form that it has nowadays. Right, so this is what it looked like. And there was a Revolutionary War, of course, 1775 to 1783. This is 1831 map. And 30 men went off to the Revolutionary War. And then they came back, and their life went on. They got married, built houses. Around here, you see lots of homes where those dots are. 27 of those dots are homes where the Revolutionary War veterans were living with the family. 3 of those would have been in Smith's Ferry. There were 30 people from Holyoke that were in the Revolution and that lived in Holyoke. Out of those 30 houses, there's only 1 left. And that's on Southampton Road. It's the Parish Hitchcock House, which is 2 houses east of the Dinks House on Southampton Road. It's the only one left. And at the beginning of this year, I had a presentation on Revolutionary War veterans, and I had told you at that point that there was also Smith's home that was the original, but it turns out I was wrong. It was gone. So there's only 1 left of all of those houses.
So where is it again on Southampton
The
Road?
one left is a Dinks house at the juncture of Rock Valley Road in Southampton.
Okay.
And then go 1 modern house to its right, and then go another house, and it turns out that's a colonial home that was built by Horace Hitchcock, and he was a Revolutionary War veteran, and he served in 2 wars, and the house is still there. It has a brick facade, so it doesn't look colonial, but it is. Okay, so here is Smith's Ferry, when it belonged to Northampton. Look at what's in between. So Northampton's up here in yellow, and green is East Hampton. When East Hampton formed as a town, I believe in 1808, Northampton made sure that East Hampton had some land on the Connecticut River, because the river was a highway back then. In 1808, there was a canal in Southampton. There was a giant canal, 2.5 miles long, going all the way up here. This was a water route, and with a canal, they could bring goods up and down the river. And so East Hampton, through Northampton's good fortunes, had given a portion of that land out to the river so they could get goods out there. But that made Smith's Ferry, which didn't have that name yet, that made it an exclave. An exclave is when you have land that's part of your town or city, but it's separated from it by another town. And so you see that the pink area, Smith's Ferry, does not touch the yellow. So Northampton, Smith's Ferry does not touch the main body of Northampton, right? Until 1909, when it became part of Holyoke. And that's a good reason why it became part of Holyoke. Northampton ignored it very much. They wouldn't provide fire service there, or they wouldn't provide water pipes to homes. Right, so it was developed by a few families, but you can see the Smith family is all right here. They own this land cut through here, and then up to the cemetery and cut it over, up to the mountaintop. You can see a ferry here. They would run that ferry for many decades. You can also see a station there. That's a train station, and the Smith family would run the train station. When a trolley came up here in the 1890s, the trolley station was put right here too. And the Smith family ran that too. They ran the tavern, the ferry, and the train and trolley stations. All of them. Right? For reference, this is where Whiting Street Reservoir would be put in. This was where also, it's called Kenilworth Castle here. They're condominiums now. So this was the start. Okay, and look at all the many names that Smith's Ferry had through the years. Over in the bottom left corner, it's called Lyman Farms, because the Lyman family came out first, and they would live in the northern part of Smith's Ferry. It was called South Farms, and that was because once it became an exclave, it had a portion of Northampton called North Farms, and then they called this South Farms. Then they changed it to Old Mountain Division's East Lots. And then the South Harbor. Why Harbor? Well, think of all the things that it's doing. It has a canal here, and the canal finally ends up here. So there's a lot of canal boats right in through here. There's a train station, right? And a trolley station later, and a tavern. And so it seemed almost like on that water, it was so busy with boats that it was almost like a harbor. Okay, and another map, and this one I've included because, look what you got here, is Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, that's Mount Holyoke College, right? And you also got an Alvard over here, and you also got a Bag over here. And I'm going to cover those a little bit later. Right, here's all the Smith family right through here. Look at them all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row. Okay, so to the houses now. 4 of the 5 homes of the Smith family are still there. One is not, the oldest one is not there. So this is that 1912 replacement. Even this has been changed a little bit, and it's been through a couple owners too. When the father owned the old house, upon his death, he gave to his young son, Charles Horton Smith, he gave him the old house, right? So Charles never lived in this house, but on the foundation of this house, Charles would build a very special building or structure. He would build a structure such that he could change his apples into something very useful. And all the sons that worked this land did the same basic one job, and then had the extra ones with the stations and the ferry. The basic job in the beginning was apple cider vinegar. So they had apple orchards all over this 1 square mile, all the way up the top of the mountain. They would change it to apple cider and then let it ferment and change to apple cider vinegar. All the sons did the same job. What do you do with apple cider vinegar? What would you do it nowadays? Well, maybe just for taste. What they did back then in the 1800s was they preserved their food with apple cider vinegar. And so all that stuff to get that vinegar was to preserve food, but it had a taste to it, and people liked that. So it was a great preservative plus added taste. These are the other 4 homes for those other sons that built there. All right, so you can see these homes still there. They're further back from the road than most colonial homes would be, and that's because that road had been moved a bit. But in the order that the sons came along and built them up, there was David. He was right here, and his house is still there. It's about a quarter mile north of the Jericho house. There was Chester's house, which looks extremely old still. This one might have new siding on it. This one looks very old. This one definitely has aluminum siding put onto it. And it's very close to the reservations of Mount Tom's Gate. And this is Hervey, and he owned the tavern, and he owned the ferry. Okay, so this Ferry Cemetery, not only did they start up all these farms, they were so excluded from Northampton. And they weren't yet included in Holyoke, so they started their own family cemetery, which turned into a neighborhood cemetery. It's the one very close to the Delaney House. And Lewis Smith is the father, and you can see that he would die in 1838. He was a Revolutionary War veteran, and he's buried in this very cemetery. This is not the original stone. This is a 1920 replacement. In the early 1900s, the federal government offered people who had served in wars replacement stones, and this family took up that offer and had this. Continental Line Revolutionary War. That means he served with George Washington's army, but he also served in militia beforehand. He was not a Minuteman, but he was ready to serve, and he proudly went off to Bunker Hill. And in the beginning, he was not with George Washington, because that army didn't come around for several months. So he was a private in a New York militia, and he was at a couple wars. And this is one of his pension statements. Okay, now his wife does have an original stone there. So this is what the stone would have looked like 10 years ago. Since then, Holyoke Preservation Trust has cleaned all the stones in the cemetery, and they're very white now. Okay, so she died in 1849. She had lived towards the end of her life with her last son, Charles. These are the 11 children. And 7 of those children, in bold, are the ones buried in Smith Ferry Cemetery. The other 4 are buried elsewhere. And so one more look at those Smith homes. It's blurry, but look how many there were. One here. And this one says Charles Smith, and then it says Vineyard Works. So he had his house right here, but he made a Vineyard Works on his property also to process all that apple cider vinegar. And he had another building put in, right? And then later they put another home right there where the school was. And then the other brothers, Milo, and then Milo, it comes again, but it has a different middle initial. His son would take over one of the houses. And then the other two brothers are gone. And this one, well, is another home that they own. It's long gone. So there was a lot there. But this is one of the stories that tells you that the home was built in about 1780, it says right there. Lewis Smith got married in 1785. He was still in the war in 1780. So that house, the very old one, was actually probably from the year he got married, 1785. Okay, this is the oldest child, Polly Smith. She would marry Seth Daniels and move away. But yet when she died in 1813, fairly young, they would bring her back to the Smithsbury Cemetery. And where are they? They're very easy to find. Go into the gates entrance right here, and they're buried in 3 different rows. In this first row are all Milo Smith, he, his wife, 2 of his sons, and then 8 of his grandchildren are all in the same row. Go to the 4th row up, and you meet the row where Lewis Smith and his wife Eunice Judd are buried right here. And then Hervey Smith is buried right here with his wife. And then the last row, you have 4 more children buried with their spouses. Right? And so it's very easy to find these. David Smith was the next child 2, but the first son, and he stayed in Smithsbury. He married in 1816. That probably when this house was built. Right? And when in 1848 he died, it was sold out of the family. Now was the first one to do so. Okay, Chester Smith was the next child, the 3rd child. And he's buried with Clarissa, his wife. And here's the stone, and this is what they look like cleaned up. They're very gorgeous stones. And this one, you see, was fractured. But we brought in people that knew how to repair gravestones, and they could put a special form of concrete in there. The concrete always stays that pure white color. Right? And this is his house. Okay, it looks extremely old. It's probably made in the year he got married, 1819. Okay, then Lewis, the son, he never made a house out in Smithsbury because when he got married, he only lived a couple more years after that, and then he died. And so I found him in the 1830 census, the year that he would die, still living with his parents. Now, Asneth Smith is buried out in South Hadley. This is the Evergreen Cemetery. The family there has one of the biggest stones in the cemetery. She married Cyrus Alvard. And this house is very easy to find down here because it's on Alvard Street. But more importantly than that, if you go to McCrae's farm in South Hadley, look across the street and then look 100 feet upwards to the right or to the south. And this house is there. It's the old Alvard house. And this is the one that Cyrus Alvard and his wife, Asneth Smith, would take over. And then they would give it to their daughter. And the daughter would live there a very long time. Okay, so it might not be in Smithsbury, but it was right across the way. Now, Hervey Smith, probably the most famous of all the Smiths. If you had asked people in Holyoke, South Hadley, in Northampton, who runs that ferry, it was Hervey Smith. The ferry was not extremely popular until he took over. And it's not that he changed anything. He made one small change, and that was he brought the ferry over from the South Hadley side over to Holyoke side and had it run from there. But he got lucky because Mount Holyoke College started up as a seminary in the 1830s, right when he took over the ferry. And who would use that ferry the most of anyone were the college students. And thus the ferry became very popular and famous, and he got rich off of that situation. So he ran for many years out to his death in 1871 when his son would take over. His son Emerson would take over his house, his tavern, the two stations. They would take over the train station, the trolley station, and he would run that ferry. Okay, and this is who owned the ferry at different points of time. You can see it's a very old ferry, made in 1770. And it had names along the way that weren't household names until Hervey Smith in 1836 took over, and then it was used a lot. Right? And his son would run even after Hervey died, his son would run it. Notice that one of the owners was Seth Daniels, and he married that first daughter, for instance. And here's pictures of it. The one towards the left, you can see the horses, right? And then it became more passengers. It closed in 1912, and from that point, people started using the bridges much more. Cars became much more prevalent, and so the ferry was not needed.
This is in 1900.
He built the boat in 1900. So he was using his own boat, but there were other ferries that they were using. And it was very much a toll line right here. And so they had to tell people there's a toll across there because there were boats on the river. And this was above the South Hadley Canal. So they had to make boats aware that a ferry was being towed across at certain points. Okay, and this was the station. I'm not totally sure which side. It's probably the Holyoke side, but they had a similar station on the South Hadley side. And it was one of 5 ferries in Holyoke. Okay, there was the Hokenham ferry, also called the Rock Ferry, that was at the point where the very tip of Smith's Ferry, if you look across, it's South Hadley across the river, and there's a big cliff there. And that part of South Hadley is called Hokenham. Then there's Smith's Ferry. There was a ferry at the entrance to the canal, the South Hadley Canal, to help ship items across the river. And then there's Robinson's Ferry, basically where the Vietnam Veterans Bridge is nowadays. And then there's Jones Ferry, where there is now Holyoke Rose. Okay, then Hiram Smith, one of the sons. And notice I put nothing here. Very hard to find information on him. There's 3 Hiram Smiths in South Hadley at the same time. He moved from Smith's Ferry, lived in South Hadley, and there were 3 Hiram Smiths in South Hadley about the same age. One was extremely famous because he would own the South Hadley Navigational Canal. And this one lived on that canal at some point, and he operated portions of it. But even when they figured out from his father's will what his wife and son's name were, even when they found those, I think in 1838, when his father's will came out, his father died, he said Hiram Smith owns a house, does not own a house in South Hadley. I own it, and I give it to my son on all the land I have in South Hadley. So he gave him a lot of land and a house, and I believe Hiram died the next year, because his two sons seem to be in some kind of orphanage in East Hampton, Lewis and Merrick Smith. I find it next year, and he has young boys out in East Hampton. Okay, there was Eunice. She was married to Hiram Babb, and Hiram lived in South Hadley. And when they were married, they probably lived for a few years in South Hadley, then he moved out to Pennsylvania. But even when she died in 1899, they brought her body back, and they buried her in Smith's Ferry Cemetery. Very long, 96 years. Then Sophia Smith, she was not buried in Smith's Ferry. She got married to a kingman, and she would die in 1851 out in Bergen, New York. All right, now Milo, he's one of the characters. So Milo Smith, he would stay in Smith's Ferry. He would have one of the homes, the middle home of 5. He would be a state rep for over 12 years. And he would also go and invest into many things, including herds of short-horn cattle. Now, there were no short-horn cattle in Holyoke or Northampton. Where was this farm that he invested in? It was out in Ohio. And so he'd go out there like once a year, and he'd have a manager there, but he invested in that for the money. He also had apple cider vinegar mill, just like the other brothers. His house is still there. And when he died, his son took over many of the ventures. His stone is the very front one, and see, it's one of the ones they fixed. This, until 7 years ago, was dark, it was cracked, and the whole thing, including the base, this base part, was on the ground. And so we were able to find people to fix this up. Look how beautiful. They fixed the very top. So. And I watched them. It took them 2 hours to get this back perfect. They had to dig down 2 feet into the earth, put gravel there, get it up straight. They fixed that crack in only 20 minutes. And then they cleaned it up. And I was so amazed, and I was most amazed by the husband, of the husband-wife team that cleaned this, put his hands down here below. The wife raised it, and for about 20 minutes, he put his hands down below while he trusted his wife not to lower this onto his hands. And they kept swearing at each other right in front of him. Okay, and this is his house. 1831 house, still in place. He did a lot of ventures around, and I have, or someone gave me that I know, a picture, and see Miles Smith, cider vinegar, dealer. All right, he also did potatoes. Any venture that he could get into to make money, he was doing it.
Question,
Yes.
was that all an original house, or would part of it have been a barn or something attached to the house?
Oh, in the back there is a barn, yeah. I've seen that. I don't think that back was attached originally.
No, I mean the attached, like on the right side. Is that all house?
You mean this portion?
Yeah.
This is like a barn, yeah.
Okay.
This is the house. It has aluminum siding on it, and it used to be, the type is no longer colonial, because by 1830, a new style comes around called Greek Revival, and that means it used to be a porch right here, long gone. But a sign of Greek Revival are these little windows to the side of the door. Okay, the last child was Charles Smith. And in 1838, his father willed his house to Charles, and he took over the house. He got married in 1838, the same year his father died, to Sophia Day. right? And he was very busy, and he did something very different. The same ventures of apple cider vinegar, but he thought about this because he had the most lands of all the brothers. Because the brothers got these 4 slices, but he took over his father's house and land. The land that he owned is now completely owned by Jericho. And they own much more land than just the house and then backwards, which is already a lot. They own to the left behind the restaurant. They own to the right behind the church that's out there, a Jehovah's Witness church. And thus, his land that he got was enormous. And so he decided to make a new business, and he would become the richest of all the children. And the business he started was trees. He would grow trees. It was a tree nursery out there, and he would get so extremely rich off of this. From 10-year span, part of the census of 1860 and 1870, you have to write down the value of your house and the value that you have as a person. In 1860, his joint house and property and money in the bank came out to about $30,000. In 1870, all of those things added together, he wrote down $200,000. His wealth in 10 years multiplied by 7 times over on trees. So he was in a tree business, and he had many workers. He got so rich he moved away from the house and let one of his workers live in the house. Okay, he's buried in Forest Hill Cemetery without a stone there. His stone is actually in Oak Grove Cemetery. And look how big it is. Okay, and he would have 2 daughters living in an old home with his wife, with his mother. Martha would marry one of the Ludington families. And look what it says of Martha. She got very rich. Very, very rich. To the point that in 1900, there's a story about her. She was a millionaire in 1900 money. Where did she get the money from? Her father was giving her money. And when he died, he gave his 2 daughters a lot of money. But David Ludington, her wife, was also very rich. So Martha was extremely rich, and she would donate all that money to charities around the area. So a lot of the Smith family fortune went off to one of the daughters, and it would be donated to charities.
Is that the Smith Charities in Northampton?
No, that is the Smith College. The same woman who started Smith College started Smith Charity, and she also started Smith, it's like a high school academy, Smith Academy. So she started 3 ventures. So Smith Charities is from Sophia Smith of Northampton, not her. All right, these are ads for all his trees, all kinds of trees. Look at all the different kinds of trees and plants, right? And we had a great person to run his business. What a venture. Okay, so we talked about Lewis Smith, the father. We talked about Charles Smith, the son, the last son. And he would be the last to die in 1893. So finally, the home seems to be leaving out of the Smith family, and it does. But it's sold to a person renting the house, and his major employer, the manager of his tree business, was Lyman Briggs. So yes, at least the Smith family goes to the Briggs family, but he was almost part of the family. He was living there, working there for many decades. Lyman Briggs would die in 1918. He built a new house, though, for himself in 1912. And that's where the Jericho's main home is now. The one that Lyman Briggs built for himself. Probably the old colonial home was getting run down. But also, these are the rest of the owners. this is not a true new family because Clementine Briggs. So Lyman Briggs had a daughter, Clementine Briggs, she married Joseph Durant. So one family, two family Briggs, third family Edward Schaefer, and then Jerry. And so we're gonna end with all these families, and it goes from very successful to keep successful for a while. But weird things start to happen. And thus, in 1911, they're digging for the new home, the Alleluia House of Jericho. It's a new house, started in 1911, finished 1912. Look on the left side, foundation built. Look on the right side. What do they find when they build a new foundation for a new house? They find a body buried in the ground, only a foot deep. It's not a Native American. And he was buried such that it's only a foot deep. Who does that? Right? So the police came out, forensic analysis came out. This is the only story I found. They just reburied him, but it's a mystery. Who is this person? And it's not because there was a flood and a person got caught in a flood and was buried on this land, because the body was neatly arranged. Right? So something strange happened. And this is the first of many strange things that start to happen. So this is the Jericho house now. The porch is gone. There's now between the first and second floor, there's new trim, but this is the house. It's also right here. This is magnified of this. And look at the cable company. They're putting up new electrical cable lines. This is a person in a white shirt right there. Okay, and this is probably from about 1912, 13 or so. Okay, so Lyman Briggs, he was the business partner of Smith. He would live there, but his wife and he would die off. Remember, they have one daughter though. They have a daughter named Clementine. So Clementine Briggs, right, Clementina, they misspelled her name, was with them. And Clementine, right there, one daughter only. And just like Charles Smith had got rich by trees, this Lyman Briggs was getting rich after that by trees. He could retire, he could give the business over to another venture. His daughter, and his daughter would run the business. She would also take the land and start, after her father died, her mother died, she would subdivide the land, start to have homes built on it. And she got married to Joseph Durant. And this is Joseph. Great guy. He was formerly the assistant to the mayor. He was that for a long time. He would die in 1935, though. All right, now starts the very strange things, because Clementine was not very honest at all in anything she did. And the bad things start to happen. So usually I only do presentation on good things, and I didn't realize that out of these four families, there was one bad apple. Until I said, I had always this ready, and I said, I'm almost complete, but I never bothered to get much about Clementine Briggs. And then I Googled her name and then put it into newspaper.com, and about 60 stories popped up, and none of them good. She was a swindler, a fraudster. Her husband didn't know what she was doing. But she did a lot of bad things. And she was not even the Lyman Briggs' daughter. She was another person. Her real name is Hattie Golden Wilson, born 1891 in Vermont. They adopted her out of her mother, her aunt her aunt put her up for adoption to her aunt's sister. So her aunt adopted her, all right? Lyman Briggs was her uncle. They adopted her because her true family, the Wilson family, in 1891, already had 7 sons in the family, and she was the 8th one born, and she was born like 10 years after the 7 sons. And so her mother and father assumed, probably correctly, that the 7 sons would not be nice to her because they're already very old compared to her. And so they gave her to her aunt, and they raised her. And that was Lyman Briggs and his wife. Okay? But she would do a lot of bad things, and probably it's true that you should try to stop criminals when they're only doing small things. Because if you don't, they're going to try to do big things. And that's what she did. All right? She was found in a lot of things, and this is not the little stuff. This is something. They put an enormous bail on her, but it was reduced. They put a $500,000 bail on her. They reduced it to $20,000. So she came up with it very easily because she had that kind of money. She owned a lot of homes in Smith Homesteads, a lot of land, right? This is her lawyer out here. And what she was doing was selling off artwork that was reprints. And it was artwork of the Grand Masters of Europe. And the reprinters, the people that did the new artwork as a reprint, did not know that this was being done. Either she ordered it up or she bought older reprints. And what she did, she put them in very, very heavy frames. And the heavy frames were so heavy, people didn't want to take the artwork out of those beautiful new heavy frames. To see that on the back, there was the required message that every reprint artist needs to have: reprint, by, year, and artist. She was hiding that fact. So no one took it out of there, and she was selling these to very wealthy families as original artworks. Okay, over and over again, and it came from many different quarters. She probably stole, with help, $1 million. Okay, and this is one picture of her. Okay, and you can see more stories about her. They're easy to find. Now, she had a helper though, and his name was Cook. He was a guy from New York, and he was supposed to head of this art swindling ring, but he got tuberculosis, and he went to live out in the Buffalo, New York area and signed himself into a sanitarium because he had tuberculosis. The police finally found him there, and he still had tuberculosis. They brought him back to New York City, charged him, but he still was very sick. He went into a sanitarium in Connecticut, where he died the next year. They were waiting to have the trial until they could find him. Then they waited until he was better, but then he died. And so she never got charged officially with the crimes in the sense that she would do jury. Right? She never went in front of a judge for that reason. But she did get charged with civil lawsuits. If you add up all these civil lawsuits, they added up basically to how much she stole, about $1 million. Did she have $1 million? Probably. Because her father, Lyman Briggs, got rich just like Charles Smith had gotten. And she had all these homes that she had made on this land she had sold. And she sold them off, and she paid back all the people she had swindled. But she was now poor. And then she started to move around. I don't know why she would around. Was it because she was poor or because the police still wanted her? I don't know. She moved out to North Brookfield. She moved out to Nashua and New Hampshire. She moved to Boston. She moved back to Nashua. She moved to Vermont. She moved to North Carolina. She got married in North Carolina. She moved then to Buffalo, and then she died. And her jobs were always, she worked in hotels. So she was working low-level jobs, probably no money. Okay, so that story by my skills was horrible, and so I was very glad the next person along, he bought the house in 1938. Notice the year was after the husband died, after she had no more charges except civil lawsuits. Of course, she had to sell the house to pay back the civil lawsuits. And the new owner was Edward Schaefer. And he was a lot of things, including he ran a rubber factory up in East Hampton. It's still there. It is, if you look into the East Works mill that's on Pleasant Street, it's the rightmost of the factories that hooked together. He ran the Paramount Rubber Company, but he was very innovative. He made not only rubber, but he made a doll called American Character Doll. He also made a stroller, and I'll show you those. He died in 1963, and then his wife would live quite a few years after that. But what he did with his land was wonderful, because he had so much land, and he had just his house on that land. He started up charities, including this Camp C2C, and he ran a Jewish community center day camp for young people. He also ran a weekend social place for Jewish groups, because he himself was Jewish. And so almost always, every season of the year, would have people up on his land. And he would do this for free. So all the groups, whether they were Jewish groups or Catholic groups, would come on his land, and they would do things in the ponds he had built back there, in the trails he had made. He had a pavilion for social outings. And this was wonderful. He got very rich out of his rubber and his doll company. He made the first ever rubber-based doll. Before that, they were always ceramic-based. There's his stroller that he invented. Okay, so he's the one that got that land in a new direction towards being charities. And he got into people's minds that that land could be used for charity reasons. He would die in 63, his wife would die in 78. She kept the land and rented it out. She lived in South Hadley with her daughter. But in 1978, she would die. The land would come on the market with the house. And who would buy it? Well, a new venture, a Holyoke venture that started in Holyoke by a person named, a priest named Robert Wagner. And I think that's him right there. There you go. Okay, and they would start Jericho there. They would start what's called the Bureau for Exceptional Children, which became Bureau for Exceptional Children and Adults. They would put on that land a chapel, equestrian center. They would put on that land a place to have educational ventures. They would rent out land both sides, but keep an area for the horses to go around. The ponds that Schaefer had built were changed into places where the children could go on boats up onto the reservoir. Okay? Horseback riding. Okay? They used to go onto trails, including up onto the Mountain Reservation trails. That's how far they used to go. Then they started making trails both right and left sides of the property. It was mostly for physically handicapped, but also mentally handicapped, deaf children, mute children, so forth. They would have dancers, theater groups. They would have hundreds of volunteers that signed up. My sister went there for a while as a deaf child on weekends. And the program succeeded through over the many years. Okay, and you see many different pictures of what they were doing out there. It grew and grew. Okay, and what's left? Well, the Hallelujah House was the Briggs house, the substitute house from the Smith home. And you see pictures front and back and side here. And then the grounds immediately behind the house was turned into memorial grounds, and they have a lot of different memorials out there, including altar, a fireplace with an eternal flame right off of methane, a fountain, and then a beautiful statue. Far behind that, you see the barns, the chapel. This is the chapel. This barn here was made by a Holyoke charity called the Beavers Club. They still exist now as the Beavers Club of West Massachusetts. They made a couple barns for themselves, a pool right here, a playground set, and then far behind that, they made, the reservoir was there, a small reservoir, but they made a Stations of the Cross, and I found 13 of the 14 required ones. And then they made a place for people to say the rosary, and they put this nice pillar up. If you take this, there's a tarred road out to these places, but there's also a tarred path off of that goes to the back of Hamill's Catering. And that leads to where the old Lewis Smith house is. It's about 100 yards along this road. But back there, the Stations Cross, the Rosary, and also there's a grotto there for the Our Lady of the Lutes. And so it's a wonderful place to walk around and do many things. And that's why I was so happy 2 weeks ago, walking the grounds, I decided I want my charity to be that charity next year. Okay? A person named Marie McCorkington. She is now the executive director of Jericho. So I told her that about this program, and I told her that next